Morning, everyone, and welcome to our first ever Society for the Scientific Study of Religion online event. This actually, right now, this weekend would have been our annual meeting in Pittsburgh. And because of the pandemic, we've had, as you know, to cancel the conference in person. I am Laura Olson, and I'm the current president of the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion. And one of the things that I had planned for my presidency was to invite Rabbi Hazzan Myers to come and speak to our group during our conference. He, of course, is located in Pittsburgh, and he graciously agreed to come during our in-person meeting to talk to us. When the conference was canceled, I reached out and said, Rabbi, would you potentially be interested and available in speaking to us virtually? And he again graciously agreed to do that. So we are so honored to have today with us Rabbi Hazzan Myers, who is the rabbi in Pittsburgh of Tree of Life or La Simha congregation in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. He has decades of experience as a religious leader, a teacher, a scholar, and a very accomplished musician. He's ordained as both a rabbi and a Hazzan, which is a cantor, in the conservative Jewish tradition. As you know, a tragic, horrible event took place almost 2 years ago at Rabbi Hazzan Myers' congregation. And since that time, he has been an embodiment, truly an embodiment of how faith and love and inclusion can defeat what he calls the H word. I am pleased to welcome today Rabbi Hazzan Myers, and he and I will have a conversation for the next half hour, 40 minutes or so about a variety of topics. And we spoke yesterday, and he is a delightful person to talk to. So I think you're going to enjoy this tremendously. Want to make sure that everyone is aware that we have a Q&A session, Q&A box that's available. And I would like to ask people to please post your questions in that Q&A box, and we will take those questions probably a little bit later during the presentation. But please, if you have questions for Rabbi, please don't hesitate to post those, and we will get to as many as we possibly can later on during the presentation. So, Rabbi, welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Olson. Pleasure to be here.
Such a pleasure to have you. I thought we might start out just sort of by, and we want to have a conversation, right? It's not going to be some big formal thing, which is lovely. But the first thing that I thought we might talk about is just to acknowledge the fact that you have led your congregation through overcoming, trying to get past, trying to heal from not just frightening circumstances, but extraordinarily frightening circumstances that came to pass in your congregation. Just a year, actually, if folks don't know this, just a year after Rabbi joined his congregation, a little bit more than a year. And so we might think a little bit about how, from your perspective as a religious leader, how have you gone about trying to help folks deal with frightening circumstances during frightening times, but then also during these specific circumstances that came about 2 years ago? What kinds of things would you point to as ways that religion and spirituality can help us in such times?
Well, first off, thank you for the invitation. A pleasure to be here to converse with you today. There is no playbook on what to do. From a specific Jewish point of view, there's no playbook because the Jewish community has been present in the United States for over 350 years. This is the first attack inside a synagogue. So there were no reports to read, no rabbis to refer to, no books to open to read about that. So I didn't have, traditional Jewish sources, shall we say, to give me some guidance as to how to respond, what to do. When you begin to look elsewhere, you see horrifically the growing club of massacres in the United States, a club that nobody wants to be a member of. So that's been an enriching and supportive place to hear of their experiences, to learn from what they've gone through, to see how can that help us in our own experiences. Most particularly out of this was a wonderful friendship that blossomed between myself and Pastor Eric Manning of Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina. So he and I speak weekly, frequently, several times a week. True, he was not present at the attack on Mother Emanuel 5 years ago. The pastor who was there, Clement Pinckney, perished in that massacre. He was called by the bishop a year later to take over, and he's been there since that time. But if there's anyone who does, to some degree, understand what it's about, he does. He gets it. So he and I talk to each other regularly. What are you doing? What am I doing? How are you feeling, etc., to try to get through those challenges. So in the end, my strong faith leads me to trust the decisions I'm making, because I have to be able to have trust in myself to move forward, to do and say the things that I need to do on a daily basis. Because again, there's no checks and balance system that's anywhere. There's none. So when I wake up every morning before I begin our morning worship, I start with the 121st Psalm. Some of you might be familiar with it. The Lord, I turn my eyes to the heaven. From whence shall my help come? My help comes from God, maker of heaven and earth. So I begin with the 121st Psalm, and then I'll say, okay, God, what do you need me to do today? Help guide me. Help me figure out the right things to say. And if you're not too busy with the rest of the world, if you want to put the words in the right order, I'm also appreciative as well. In the end, I've just got to trust myself.
That's right. That's all you can do. It strikes me that you would be able to use some of those sort of skills that you've developed, right? That sort of approach of, okay, one day at a time, and take each individual challenge as it comes, to help your congregation deal with the second huge loss that you've experienced, which is something that all of us are sharing in, and that is the COVID pandemic, right? The fact that you can, at this point, no longer, right, all be together physically and hug one another and greet one another and have that, right, sort of experience, that corporate experience of being present with one another. So this adaptation that you have made to the online format, to trying to kind of help people deal with that second component of fright and loss and challenge.
I've learned a lot in the initial year in terms of trauma for our congregation. And based upon those experiences, that's helped offer me guidance regarding choices to be made then because of COVID. So for my congregation, we were displaced once. You can see the backdrop behind me is the Tree of Life building. It's been closed since October 27, 2018. As the prophet Nehemiah says, it's no longer a prayerful place. We will reopen one day, and we will reopen on this same site, because to not do so gives the message to the rest of the world that evil won. And I will not let evil win on my watch. Not now, not ever. So we will reopen. I don't have a timetable that I can share at this time. Then with the pandemic, the synagogue that we had temporarily moved into, which is roughly a half a mile down the road, they closed. So as of March 13th, my services became all virtual. So for my congregation, they were displaced now twice, re-traumatized because of this secondary displacement. So some of the things that I had learned and understood through trauma were that the things that are familiar, the things that are the regular, the things that you're accustomed to, you need to keep those in place as anchors to be able to stabilize the community, to say, okay, some of the things we're doing, we're used to doing. So for example, my Friday evening services, I didn't change up what I did. All that changed essentially was the delivery system, the service, how I did it, what I sang, when I offered remarks, all of that remained identical, no change. That's an anchor to be able to say, okay, you're not offering me a totally different service. The only thing that's different is I'm looking at you through my computer, my TV, my iPad, my smartphone, etc. But the service is the same. So the stability piece in that, to just be regularly available for anyone who just needs to talk or who may just need to be referred to an appropriate mental health professional, because I've learned enough to know when do I see the signs of someone who's in trouble, who needs that type of help. To continue to find ways for engagement for my congregation through adult education programs, through social and cultural events, say that the building closed, but the Tree of Life didn't close. We're a sacred community, and as such, we're portable. We could take it wherever we go, and we're still the Tree of Life. So we have whatever number of people on a service, that's where the Tree of Life is. So if the Tree of Life exists in the Ethernet, then we exist in the Ethernet. Brick and mortar can be replaced. Humans cannot. So the most important thing to just create continued opportunities to gather virtually. I also had, for a while in the pleasant weather, we would gather, we'd open up the parking lot of the Tree of Life building, and we would safely gather outdoors. I just had people bring a chaise lounge, sunblock, and a bottle of water, and sit outside and schmooze for an hour.
Nice.
Appropriately distanced with masks, just because human beings are a tactile species. We need to hug, we need to shake hands, we need to fist bump, etc. And we miss that. And particularly with the second commemoration coming up, I know that had we be in person, all we would be doing is hugging each other, holding on for dear life, using up every available Kleenex that's around. And I know people are going to miss that dearly. And while I could symbolically grasp my computer monitor and send a hug to people, which I think they'd appreciate, or sometimes in the case of when I FaceTime with my daughter, who's in New Jersey, just give a big smooch right onto the screen of that, those sorts of things, to know, okay, we're there the best we can be. And that's all we can do, is just be there the best we can be. I try to just follow along with other colleagues of all faiths to see what are some of the other things they're doing, what are some of the best practices that I can learn, so that I could just be the best that I could be to serve my congregation during these challenging times. We're still virtual, no immediate plans to go in person right now. Part of that, I think, relates to what we did for the High Holy Days. We transformed my entire living room into a sound studio, complete with Hollywood lighting, appropriate microphones, a full green screen. And I can just show your viewers just quickly. So as opposed to the backdrop that they see, we had some photographs of our main sanctuary. So they saw on a green screen my main sanctuary. So it gave them the sense of, oh, look, we're in the place where we would normally pray, or when we would have a moment to be near the ark. I would use that one so they could see the ark. So use the technology to your advantage to create something familiar and comfortable. But we did not pray in person. That would have meant 800 people. There's a concept in Jewish law called pikuach nefesh. Literally, it means mortal danger. What that means is that everything that God commands us to do can be put aside when mortal danger is present. So in a case of the pandemic, we had a special committee that convened with medical advice from medical professionals of Pittsburgh. So we had local people who were up on exactly what's happening. And what was most clear is that there was no overwhelming need to meet in person that could be superseded by anything except mortal danger. So because of that, we did not meet in person. We still do not meet in person. The numbers are going up slightly in Allegheny County, which is the county I live in. So if the numbers go up, that means, no, you don't go out more, you go out less.
Exactly.
So that is the particular tenet that guides all of my decisions. Is there mortal danger to people in the things that we would do? If the answer is yes, then safety takes precedence over everything else. That doesn't mean we can't pray. Of course we can still pray because God is all around us. But that just means not in person. No different than this gathering. Mortal danger is of greater concern. So you really took into account the Jewish tenets and said, we're not going to be in person. So what you did is something very Jewish.
Right.
We're going to be virtually because it's safer.
Right. And then that gives everybody a sense of, okay, right, we might miss the being in person, but not only is it sensible, it's also profoundly consistent with the teachings of Judaism. Yes. Yes. And so one of the things that you mentioned to me when we talked yesterday, which I found so interesting and engaging, and I think our listeners will as well, is this sort of need, and this is relevant as well to, I think, research that's going to happen around how congregations have reacted and adjusted to COVID. How you have encouraged members of your congregation to create their own sacred spaces at home and to wear, to not wear their sweats when it's time for Shabbat, for Friday evening services or for adult ed or anything like that. Put on something decent and feel like a human being again. And to have this area in one's home, which reminded me of home shrines in the Hindu tradition. And sort of even reminded me of my mother telling me, put on something decent, even if you're going out for a really challenging day. If you feel like you look good, it's gonna help. And then so I need to tell the rest of the group, Rabbi and I were talking about, so he obviously lives in Pittsburgh and I'm from Wisconsin. And so we talked about the sort of sacredness of Sunday game day, right? And the wearing of one's Steeler wear, or in Wisconsin, the wearing of one's Packer wear, that, this is in its own way, sort of creating a sacred space. And you would, maybe have people over and have your cheese tray and your beer and what have you for creating this sacred space, as it were, for something that is so culturally significant in certain areas as the Steeler game or the Packer game. So that, this whole idea of the sacred, and you already alluded to it, right? The sacred can be wherever it wants to be, wherever it needs to be.
I attended my first Steeler game shortly after I'd been here. And I made the observation as I was, watching the game. Of course, I'm a football fan, that despite where I grew up, which is on the East Coast, specifically here in Pittsburgh, because I've never been in Green Bay. One day I hope to, because got to go to the frozen tundra, or else you haven't lived.
I'm just saying, yes, you do.
But that here in Pittsburgh, football is religion in a way that I've never experienced. And I don't mean it as a negative or positive, just an observation. So let me then share the comparisons that I made. People prepare all week for an upcoming game. They talk about it all week. It's on their mind. So there's prep involved. That also includes make sure you've washed all the appropriate religious attire that you're going to wear for the game. Particularly if it was a home game the week before, you've got to make sure that your religious uniform is clean and properly pressed, etc. Everything's neatly laid out for that. You don't mind sitting in traffic to get to your parking spot because you know this is something big, so you've psyched yourself up for it. As you enter the sacred temple, because that's what Heinz Field, the football field here is, it's the temple. You see there, as well as, and I know Dr. Olson, you saw the same thing at the airport at Pittsburgh. And when you come off the elevator, the escalators down the Pittsburgh airport, there are two statues that you come up to next to each other. One is George Washington in a Continental Army uniform. The other is a statue of Franco Harris. So like, why Franco Harris? Football fans voted a few years ago on what was the most memorable, significant play ever in the history of the NFL. And it was Franco catching that tipped football off of shoestrings and running for a touchdown. What do they call it here? They call it the Immaculate Reception. That's religious terminology. There are statues and pictures throughout the stadium and it's religious icons. It's the great players of the history of the Steelers that people stand, worship, and obeisance and talk about nonstop. You take your pew seat. The seats in the stadium are just as comfortable as the wood pews in an old-fashioned synagogue or church. There's a liturgy to the game. For example, at a Steelers game, the announcer will go after the team has made a first down. I apologize for those who don't know a thing about football. I'm not going to try to be too complex with it. He'll begin by saying, "Another Steelers," and then everyone announces out loud, "First down," and they point in the direction. So there's call and response within the football game. Just as in the case of religious services, there are moments we stand up and we rise for holy moments. Well, when there's a touchdown scored, everyone rises. When there's a turnover and the Steelers get the football back, everyone rises. So it's a religious experience. So what I said to my congregation is, can we take those elements and somehow utilize that thinking, that framework, and inculcate some of those values into our homes, particularly with the coming High Holy Days, which we've just concluded not that long ago. To create in your home a sacred space where you're not going to have all of the trappings of daily life there, but a place to be able to focus on prayer to help get yourself in the mood. Whatever you would be wearing that day to religious services, wear it that day in that sacred space. I encourage people that if they have a larger screen TV, some TVs you can stream internet live. If you can't, take your laptop, plug it into the TV so you can have the larger viewing and not have 4 or 5 family members crowded around a laptop at a kitchen table for the High Holy Days. And as you said, you can't just come in sweats for the holiest days of the year. You can't lay in bed in your pajamas with your laptop on your belly and a cup of coffee and say, "Okay, Rabbi, move me." I wouldn't suggest that you also have the services in a hot tub. That's probably not the most conducive place for services. I could probably use one after services. So if you want to invite me over, that's okay, but not during services. So we want to take something of the sacred and transform a space in our homes to make it someplace sacred. Um, So that when you're there, the entire environment is one that can be conducive to prayer. Um, If they want to stand up and cheer loudly like a touchdown when I give a sermon, I'm okay with that. I'll manage. But if you're going to take all this time to prep for a football game, you need to do the same thing to help yourself prepare. It's unfair to you as a worshiper to just sit down in your chair and just go, okay, it's up to you now.
Bring it
That's
in, Rabbi, right?
an unfair burden for clergy because it's a partnership. So if it's 100% on me, that's totally unfair. You need to be able to look in the mirror after the service and say to yourself, what did I do to make my time spent there meaningful? I do the same thing for myself. What did I do to make the time as meaningful as I could for my congregants with the challenges we face? So the same thing, but it's teamwork. Just like the football game is teamwork, so is worship teamwork. It's not 100% clergy and 0%. It's not like, to use a New York reference, it's not the Fulton Fish Market where you're going to see the rows of fish with the glass eyes with the mouths open like this. That's not what worship can be about. Um, a comparable example would be, say, people who go to the Philharmonic or the opera. You buy the tickets because you enjoy what the program is. You're excited about it. You're engaged in it. When you come in, you're really sitting on the edge of your seat. When you hear that great aria and you know it, you're just into it. Well, you need to take those same things and use that to get engaged in worship. So that's how I took and compared the two. But I knew from my congregation, they understood exactly what I was talking about when I referenced Steeler football, which is religion here, and say, we need to take um, that and we need to transform that into best practices into our own particular homes. And I got really good feedback from people who did appreciate that, who did make efforts to transform some space in their home, wherever that space might be. I mean, I know one person said they had an unused bedroom upstairs. They moved their big TV upstairs. They had two comfortable chairs upstairs. The gentleman wore his suit and his prayer shawl. They had the books because we had drive-in days where you could pick up the books. And they were in and created their own sacred space. So if it meant something to just one family, okay, I'm grateful to God. I got through to one family and they felt it was a meaningful experience. And that's all I could do is try.
Right. Absolutely. So I wonder, we've got a couple of questions here, and one of them is about how one re-sacralizes a place after something challenging, frightening, horrible has happened. And it can be something as horrible as what happened to your congregation, or it could be something more micro level, like an individual's death. I think of, like, in my case, my father passed away in my house, and that, this sort of thing,
Yeah.
right? How do you reclaim that sort of thing? It seems to be an incredibly relevant question, especially as all of us in one way or another are dealing with challenging times, with potentially violent times. And that harks to Dr. Brown's question about, right, which might be a direction that we can go here as we start to wrap up. How do you deal with, right, not just sort of frightening times insofar as things that already have happened, and reclaiming life, reclaiming the sacred after things like that happened, but also how do you use it in circumstances where the frightening is omnipresent, right, around the
Mhm.
H word, around intolerance, around injustice, around racism, etc.
Well, there are, I think, different components to what you just asked. So let me try to pull out a few of those. The first is uh, help distinguish. My father passed away, it'll be 3 years ago this coming Hanukkah.
Mm.
It was the I'm lucky that it was the first loss that I had experienced of a parent. So I'm grateful for all the years that my father was present on this planet. My mother is still alive. So I went through the various stages of mourning, as Elizabeth Kubler-Ross explains. I've read it. I wasn't thinking of her as I went through it. I was just experiencing for myself. It was educational for me because even though you read it, until you do it yourself, you really can't understand fully what she's talking about until you've gone through it. So
That's for
I
sure.
went through it.
Yeah.
Let me distinguish that then with the Tree of Life massacre. Unlike being able to integrate it into your being and you move forward with the loss of a parent, where there will be bittersweet moments during the year where you recall something, um, or the birth date brings back memories, the anniversary of the date of death, or your parents' anniversary, or Father's Day. There'll be moments. It's just going to happen. That's what it means to be human. Here in Pittsburgh, we're reminded of the massacre every single day. I mean, me particularly, every single day. Even just by having the backdrop behind me, it reminds me of my displacement and that I can't be in my building. When we drive through town, you'll see signs that are symptomatic of this pin here. Which is all about the H word. These signs are on people's lawns, that there's no place for H in Pittsburgh, in businesses. So whenever you see it, I know they're well-meaning and I know what they're trying to say, but it's a continual reminder. So wherever we go, whenever I see congregants, they're a reminder of what happened that day. Our media professionals have told us that the Tree of Life is mentioned somewhere in media every day, ever since, every single day. It's in the media somewhere. There's a reference to it every single day. So you can't escape. There is no place to go that it's not referenced or compared to in conversation with some other event that's happening in the world or that did happen. So that's the difference between the loss, say, of a parent, where you integrate it and you learn to live with the fact that the person's no longer physically there, but you could feel the presence of your loved one. You remember special moments, all of those things. For me, it's every single day I'm reminded. I live it 24/7. The
Unreal.
I deal with it so that it doesn't run my life or take me to dangerous mental health places. That's a function of inner strength and the ability to say that I'm not going to let the perpetrator have another victim in me by having it ruin and destroy my life. But I'm going to take it and I'm going to do positive things with it. That there have been immense, unlimited, positive outcomes that one would never think of, even from a massacre, in terms of the love, the strength, the support, the comfort that came from people all around the world. It still comes to this day. People who handwrite letters. We can remember what that used to be like, to take a piece of paper and a pen or pencil and write a letter, who handwrite and pour out their souls. They have not been able to talk about it yet since, and pour out their souls to me. Letters I have from places I would never have expected. Governments that you would have never expected would share their sense of loss to the Jewish people and to me particularly, which is incredible. And that's ongoing. And what it says to me is this: the vast majority of the world rejects what this person did as being inhuman, literally then judgmentally not deserving of being part of the human race, being what William Safire used to call infrahuman. I'll give his quick example was when you would ride on the Garden State Parkway. In the good old days, there were toll booths, and in my day, it was a quarter. So you put the quarter in. But there would still be a toll booth attendant, because if you didn't have the quarter and you give $1, you'd need change. There were no um, uh, booths where there were just singular tokens, no electronic Easy Pass yet, that wasn't invented. A human being would say good morning or good day to the toll booth collector. An infrahuman says nothing, drops in the quarter, and keeps going. So,
Yep.
So just to a tangent for a moment. So
Right.
these continued wonderful ways that people reach out, sending unsolicited gifts, music they compose, poetry, um, gives me immense hope that the vast majority of the world is comprised of really good, decent people. The problem is they're not the one who get attention,
That's
because
right.
they're the silent majority. And I've spoken about it more than once, that it's time for the silent majority to wake up and become the vocal majority and say to the rest of the planet, your evil doesn't belong with humanity. You're not part of what it means to be human. You have two choices. You can join the nations of humanity, or we're going to find a different category to put you in, because you don't belong with humanity. And for too long, the silent majority has put up with the evil acts of the minority. It's time to change that trend. It's time for all the good people to speak up and say, no, that's enough. You don't belong there. So I'm filled with hope. There's lots of really good people out there. I don't mean just in the United States, I mean all around the world.
Absolutely.
I see God in all of the good, wonderful things that Americans have done during this pandemic to try to help fellow citizens, whether it be God's presence in all of the healthcare workers who struggled at the front lines. That's God's presence in the world. Helping those in need who have food security issues, job security issues, homelessness, all of these good, decent people. They're the ones who are the heroes in America that get no attention. We give too much attention to the bad, because that's what sells newspapers, as they say.
Yep.
It's time for us to demand of the media that they change the proportion. It's way out of whack. Too much negative, which I think excuse me, negatively impacts the psyche of America.
Mhm.
So I don't watch the news at 11 o'clock East Coast time anymore. That's too depressing. Why do I need to go to bed depressed? I'll find other sources for what happened during the day. So when I go to bed at night, I go to bed at night feeling in a good place, reviewing my day, hoping that I've done the best that I could in the challenges that I faced. But I'm not going to bed having just read about this murder and this shooting and this robbery and all of these negative things that have happened. I don't think that's positive. I don't think it helps our mental health.
No.
And I hold the media responsible for not doing its due diligence. Yes, you could tell us what happened in a public service way, but you need to give more examples of what the good is that people do, because when you show it publicly, you're going to encourage more people to do it. If you keep showing murder and bank robbery, etc., you encourage more people to do it so they can get their 10 minutes of fame on TV. Totally imbalanced.
Right.
The equilibrium is way, way off.
Absolutely. And one thing that comes to mind as well, in my case, around, or not just in my personal case, but in my mind, around Dr. Brown's question here, that if the media were to give more attention to all the good people out there that you've just alluded to, who speak up against H, who speak up against anti-Semitism, who speak up against racism, who speak up against injustices, and do so in a way that, you know, really speaks truth to power, and do so in a calm, organized way, right? That maybe that message gets out there better and helps to undercut some of the polarization that we find ourselves in this country, at least, so hopelessly mired in.
We need to drown the world And it's funny because this week's portion in the Torah that's read this Sabbath is the story of Noah and the ark.
Hmm.
So God floods the world because of evil. Clearly that didn't work.
Hmm.
If we
It
look
did.
at it, didn't work. We need to drown the world with love and kindness, and to continue to strive to do that. That's how you silence all of the evil and the bad in the world, is by overwhelming it with goodness. When there's far more goodness out there on a regular basis, uh, that's how you drown it. Um, and we're not doing enough to do that. And we need to do more of that. More kindness, more goodness, more love. Um, as the phrase is, kill them with kindness.
Mhm.
We need to do more of that. We all have the capacity to do that. Um, we just haven't taken that capacity and come anywhere near uh, full capacity yet. A lot of work to do.
Do you think, and this will be my last question for you, is there a way that we as scholars, right, everyone involved in this organization studies religion from a social scientific standpoint? Is there a way that our research could, from your standpoint, help society in general understand what these problems look like and maybe suggest solutions for how religious voices and religious organizations can help to address the explosion of H and the extent to which we are constantly bombarded by it, by the media, by social media, by just the environment surrounding us?
There's been so much written about the negative influences of religion. Um, those who would be in positions of authority and power who have abused those positions and authority and power. Um, Again, it's the same story of the bad always gets more of the attention. I do believe it's fair and reason to challenge um, if all of these faiths are based upon goodness and kindness, etc., then where is all of this bad coming from? And that's a really fair question to ask. Um, I don't have a specific answer. I think um, you professionals, that's part of your task to perhaps try to come up with, well, where does all of this come from? But on the other hand, if we only research into the bad, we never can research, well, what about all the good that comes out of religion? Is there any good that comes out of religion? Yes, we can say all of these wars that have been fought in the name of religion, we've been through that already. All of the bad actors in different faiths that uh, make the news because of religion. We all know about that. I don't think it's being dishonest to say that let's try to find a little more balance and find, well, what about all of the good people out there who are working on doing good? What is the source of where they get that energy to do that? Um, and to be able to, I think at a time when America needs hope, America needs to be able to see that we do have a brighter future um, in all regards, both from a pandemic point of view, from a politicized point of view, and that religion does offer that. But too often we preach to the choir.
Mhm.
It's the good, decent people who listen, who behave that way. Yes, so that onus is upon me as a religious leader. How do I reach the people who don't belong to the choir to get them willing to at least listen to what I have to say? I'm not asking them yet to join the choir. First, just be open to hearing it. Yeah, but I think research into what are the positive impacts that faith can have upon the behaviors of people. What are successful models for that, and what made it succeed?
Mhm.
Um, those sorts of things, I think, are important questions that can be answered, because by sharing that research, I think that information could be really productive for faith leaders of all faiths around the world to see, okay, here are models of what are working and why. How can I read that? What can I learn from that to be even better at what I do? I've never felt that I've reached the plateau of I've done all I can sort of moment. I think I can always be better. Always striving to be the best version of myself that I can be. And that's a daily challenge for me. So what can the research show us about who are the people who are being successful in those regards? What are the things that they're accomplishing that can help give us guidance? And I'm not talking about like Mother Teresa. I'm talking about the ordinary, run-of-the-mill pastor, priest, rabbi, imam. What are they doing that, what guides them? How do they continue to fight off the challenges that they face, to be able to be productive role models, to be able to spur on their people,
Right.
to be able to grow and do more good within a community? What are the commonalities in all of that? Is there a template or a set of templates that we can look at and say, here are the things they did. What are the things we need to be able to do to be able to reach it? I think that could be, for me, something productive. That's something I would read. I can
Mhm.
say, I won't speak for any other clergy person in the world, but it's
Right.
something I would read because, again, to strive to be my best, I look at all sources to find what are other best practices out there. So a best practices sort of piece of research, I think, could be a really productive sort of piece. That just, from my point of view, we need to turn around all the negative.
And that would involve maybe looking at congregations and leaders like you and like Reverend Manning in Charleston and that sort of thing. But then also just generally speaking, congregations and religious leaders, not just in this country, but around the world, as you say, who do. All right, what do those things look like, right? What do they speak out publicly? Do they organize marches, as many do? Do they, right, do they engage in anti-racism teaching, anti-H teaching, things of this nature? And that, to some degree, right, that's an empirical question. And there's obviously research that's been done on congregations, this big thriving field called congregational studies. That might be something in particular for people in that niche of our field to take on as a concern.
I recognize that what works in one congregation doesn't work in another. I'll give a short example of that. Going back several decades, initially first in the Reform movement with that denomination within Judaism, that's where instrumental services began to rise again, particularly in the 50s and 60s. It took quite a bit of time for that to slowly catch on within the conservative movement, of which that's the denomination of which I'm a member. It took more time to do that. There were two synagogues at the time in the, I would say, mid 80s, they really began roughly. Um, One was in the East Coast in New York, one was in the West Coast in LA. They each created their own type of instrumental service, fresh new melodies that brought back to the service hundreds, if not thousands, of younger people in their teens and above. It became a social setting for people to meet. Um, so I'd attended, for example, the one in the East Coast one in New York. I had the recordings of the West Coast, listened to all of that, but I came to realize that, and I'd read this from others, they were trying to duplicate exactly what was happening in the other synagogue and didn't understand why it didn't work. And the answer was, you can't do exactly what they were doing because the chemistry of that institution is what made it work specifically. Every institution has a different chemistry. So you need to find what's the right formula that works specifically for your own institution that isn't the same as theirs. And I came to see there was a congregation that was having services on the beach Friday, getting 300 people. And I'm thinking, well, if they can do that, what is it that I can do, sort of thing. That's what spurred me on. I created my own version, but it was based upon what worked for my congregation, which only worked for mine because of my people and my skill sets and that entire chemical formula. So each one is different. So while what's working successfully in one house of worship might only be perfect for them, okay, what could be gleaned from that to say, how can I revise that, retool it, unplug this piece, insert this piece, and say, how can I make that something productive and useful for where I am? Because I think the same rule applies. One size doesn't fit all, but I think there could be a lot more research done to identify, even if there's a, like a synagogue of 1,200 families, something they're doing successfully. My synagogue is 250 families. That doesn't mean that I can't learn from that what's working well. So I think there's plenty of room for research where what are the things that are working um, from all houses of worship that are improving the quality of life, that offer people hope, that give inspiration, that point towards brighter days, that people want to be engaged in because they feel enthused by it and inspired by it. What are those best practices, and how can we imitate them each within our own institutions? Because I think that to serve the common good of humanity, uh, it doesn't matter your faith, or if you're an agnostic or an atheist, that doesn't matter, because we all have that common good goal. What is it that we can do to make that work?
And each of us on our own and in the groups that we identify with, right, you have particular kinds of ways in which we connect, not just with hope, but with the sacred, and understanding how each individual, right, like for me personally, I love, you mentioned classical music, and that is something that's very, very, very special to me and moves me, right? So a specific kind of music in the congregation or in a congregation might move individuals, but not everyone. And so figuring out what that's part of the creativity, I think, of being a religious leader, is taking the pulse of your congregation and determining, okay, this might be meaningful to Laura, but it isn't going to be meaningful to the entire sort of group. And that, whether that's around music, whether that's around worship style, whether that's around innovation, whether that's around the message, that what you emphasize, what you don't emphasize, that, right, there's all this variety that we encounter.
Yeah,
So
and I mentioned it when I first auditioned to the congregation, when I gave my first sermon, and I said, um, present right now we have people who are used to a traditional service and want a full traditional service. We have people who are not yet comfortable with Hebrew who want a lot of English readings. We've got people who like a specific style of, like, say, Hasidic music and want a lot of that type of music in the service. We have young families with kids who want things within the service to engage their children, be it a story or some other element like that to engage it. And they also want it shorter because of their children's attention span. We've got people who want yoga and meditation in that. Now, all of those people are present simultaneously in one service. How do you craft a religious service, 1 hour length, that meets all of those needs simultaneously? Do you do 7 services on a rotational basis and say to the people, this is your service, you come once every 7 weeks? That's probably not the best way to get a regular attendance. But how do you work with people to say, okay, I'm going to introduce this element. Now, you might not be comfortable, but I'm doing this element for you. So if you're going to say that this element is okay for you, you need to be patient and to accept that a service is a salad. And if I'm the one putting together the salad, there's going to be cucumber in it, despite the fact that some of you don't like cucumber. There needs to be the different elements in it to be able to reach out to different people. That's not just with our religious services, that's with all that we do, to recognize everyone's coming from a different place. They have different strengths, they have different interests. How can we take the I out of the formula and just make it we? And I think that's the challenge for anything that I do, be it a religious service, an education class, or beyond just the scope of my congregation itself, to go beyond that in anything that I do? How do I remove the I and make it the we?
I think that's a wonderful spot to end our conversation. Leave folks with that particular message. Rabbi Myers, I can't thank you enough for joining us today. I personally enjoyed having this opportunity to get to talk to you and get to know you just a little bit. And I so wish that we were in Pittsburgh. Like I said, I'd love to buy you a cup of coffee and get a chance to hug you, frankly. And I think probably a lot of our listeners, viewers have a similar thought. So maybe one day when our conference does in fact go to Pittsburgh in like 2024, maybe I'll have that opportunity. So thank you ever so much for sharing with us today. And I'll be thinking of you on the commemoration and looking forward to the after times with regard to coronavirus. So
Thank you,
thank
Dr.
you ever
Thank
so
you, Williams, for hosting and coordinating.
Thank you. Thanks. You take good care. And thank you to all of our Triple SR and RRA members who have also had the opportunity to join us. We will see you next week for another Friday, Fall Friday, which will include Pat Whitberg, Patricia Whitberg, Dr. Patricia Whitberg, shame on me, the president of the Religious Research Association, and Dr. Nicole Phillips, who is a professor at Emory University. And we will be talking specifically about the intersections of race and inequality and moving forward after the year 2020. So thank you all so very, very much, and take good care.
Thank you.